I still remember the day he said he wanted to just talk. Those 3 words should have been innocent enough, but something in his voice made my heart flutter. It wasn't our first conversation, but it felt different this time, weighted with possibility. We'd been dancing around each other for months, friends who perhaps wanted more, but never quite crossed that invisible line. When he texted asking if he could come over, I replied casually, "Sure, what's up?" His response was simple, "Nothing really. Just want to talk." I spent the next hour cleaning my apartment, changing my outfit 3 times, and wondering why I was so nervous if we were just talking. My apartment wasn't anything special, a small 1-bedroom with mismatched furniture and too many plants. But that evening, as the late afternoon sun cast golden rectangles across my living room floor, it felt like a stage being set for something important. I'd made coffee, then decided that was too formal, so I put out some beers instead. Then I worried that might send the wrong message, so I added a pitcher of water and some glasses. Looking back, it's almost comical how much thought I put into hydration options for a casual conversation. When the doorbell rang, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed my shirt and tried to calm the riot of butterflies in my stomach. It's just a talk, I reminded myself. People have conversations every day. This isn't special. But even as I thought it, I knew I was lying to myself. There was something in the air, a charge of potential that made every nerve ending tingle with anticipation. I opened the door, and there he stood. He wasn't dressed differently than usual, just jeans and a simple button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that I'd always secretly admired. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his hands through it nervously, and there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read. Excitement? Anxiety? Whatever it was, it mirrored the chaos in my own chest. "Hey," he said, with that half-smile that always made my stomach flip. "Thanks for letting me come over." His voice was steady, but I noticed he was shifting his weight slightly from foot to foot, a telltale sign of nervousness I'd picked up on during our months of friendship. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Mi casa es su casa." I immediately regretted the formality of the phrase. We weren't usually so awkward with each other. We'd spent countless evenings together watching movies, studying, or just hanging out. Why did this feel so different? As he walked past me, I caught a hint of his cologne. Nothing overpowering, just a subtle woodsy scent that I'd come to associate with him. He'd been in my apartment dozens of times, but now I saw him taking it in as if it were new territory, glancing at the photos on my wall, the stack of books on my coffee table, the throw blanket haphazardly folded on my couch. "I like what you've done with the place," he said, gesturing vaguely to a new art print I'd hung last week. It was such a normal thing to say, but we both knew my apartment hadn't changed significantly. He was filling space, buying time before whatever he'd really come to discuss. "Thanks," I said, following his gaze to the print. It reminded me of that hike we took last fall, remember? When we got lost and ended up finding that amazing viewpoint. The memory hung between us. A day of laughter, shared sandwiches, and a moment at sunset when our hands had brushed and lingered just a second too long. He nodded, his eyes meeting mine with unexpected intensity. "I remember everything about that day," he said quietly, and something in his tone made my breath catch. There was a weight to his words that suggested he wasn't just talking about the hike. I gestured to the couch, suddenly aware that we were still standing awkwardly in the middle of my living room. "Do you want something to drink? I have water, beer, coffee, probably some tea somewhere if I dig around enough." I was rambling, a nervous habit I'd never quite broken. "Water's fine," he said, settling onto the couch. I noticed he sat in the middle rather than at the end, leaving me to decide how close I wanted to be when I joined him. Such a small detail, but it felt significant somehow. I poured 2 glasses of water, using the moment in the kitchen to collect myself. "Get it together," I whispered to myself. "It's just a conversation." But as I returned to the living room and handed him his glass, our fingers touched briefly, and that familiar electric current ran up my arm. Just a conversation, but with undercurrents that threatened to pull me under. I sat beside him, close but not too close, and tucked one leg beneath me as I turned to face him. "So," I began, aiming for casual and missing by a mile. "What did you want to talk about?" He took a sip of water, then set the glass down carefully on a coaster. Always considerate, even when he seemed nervous. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he started, his eyes fixed on the glass rather than meeting mine. About us. About our friendship. The word friendship hung in the air between us, and I felt a complicated mix of emotions, disappointment that he'd categorized us that way, but also a flicker of hope at the thinking a lot part. What about our friendship? I prompted when he didn't continue. He ran a hand through his hair, that nervous gesture again, and finally looked up at me. Do you ever wonder if we're missing something? By just being friends, I mean. And there it was. The question that had lived in the back of my mind for months, now spoken aloud and impossible to ignore. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Sometimes, I admitted, deciding that if he was being brave, I could be too. Actually, more than sometimes. The relief on his face was immediate and transformative. His shoulders relaxed, and that half-smile returned, broader now. Really? Because I've been driving myself crazy trying to figure out if I was the only one feeling this thing between us. I laughed softly, some of my nervousness dissipating. Definitely not the only one. I just wasn't sure if you felt it too, or if I was projecting because. I trailed off, suddenly self-conscious. Because? He prompted, leaning slightly closer. I took a deep breath. Because I've had feelings for you for a while now. But our friendship is so important to me, and I didn't want to risk ruining it if you didn't feel the same way. He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. That's exactly why I've been hesitant too. You're one of my favorite people, you know that? The thought of making things weird between us was terrifying. But lately, I can't stop thinking about what we might be missing out on by not being honest with each other. As he spoke, I noticed the way the late afternoon light caught in his eyes, turning them from their usual deep brown to something warmer, like amber. I'd always found him attractive, but in that moment, with honesty making him more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him, he was beautiful. So what are you saying exactly? I asked, needing the clarity of words even as his body language was shifting toward me, his knee now gently touching mine on the couch. I'm saying, he began, his voice lower now, that I came here to tell you that I have feelings for you. Real feelings. The kind that make me think about you when you're not around. The kind that make me look forward to seeing you more than anyone else. The kind that make me wonder what it would be like to be more than just your friend. The words hung in the air between us, honest and exposed. I felt a surge of emotion, relief, joy, anxiety, hope, all tangled together in my chest. I have those kinds of feelings for you too. I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. I have for a long time. His smile then was different from any I'd seen before. Not the casual grin of friendship, but something more intimate, meant just for me. So where do we go from here? He asked, his hand moving tentatively across the couch until his fingers just barely touched mine. I looked down at our hands, so close to intertwining, but not quite there yet. A perfect metaphor for where we stood. I guess we figure it out together, I said, gathering my courage and letting my fingers slide between his. His hand was warm and strong, and he gave mine a gentle squeeze that sent a flutter through my entire body. I'd like that, he said softly. Then, after a moment's hesitation, there's something else I've been thinking about. A lot, actually. What's that? I asked, though something in his expression made me think I already knew. His eyes dropped to my lips for just a second before meeting my gaze again. I've been wondering what it would be like to kiss you, he admitted, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. I've thought about it more times than I can count. The air between us seemed to grow thicker, charged with possibility. We were sitting closer now, though I couldn't remember either of us moving. I've wondered that too, I confessed, my voice barely audible even in the quiet room. He reached up slowly, giving me plenty of time to pull away if I wanted to, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered against my cheek, warm and slightly rough. Would it be okay if I found out? He asked, his voice husky. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He leaned in slowly, his eyes holding mine until the last moment when they fluttered closed. And then his lips were on mine, soft and tentative at first, a question more than a statement. I answered by leaning into him, my free hand finding its way to his shoulder. The kiss deepened, becoming more confident, more certain. His hand moved from my cheek to the back of my neck, fingers threading into my hair. Everything else fell away, my nervousness, my doubts, the world outside my apartment. There was only this moment, this connection, this revelation of something that had been building between us for longer than either of us had admitted. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, I kept my eyes closed for an extra moment, wanting to memorize every sensation. The warmth of his hand still in mine, the lingering taste of him on my lips, the feeling of finally crossing a threshold we'd been approaching for so long. "Wow," he said softly, his forehead resting against mine. "That was—" "Yeah," I agreed, opening my eyes to find him looking at me with such tenderness it made my heart ache. "It really was." He smiled, brushing his thumb across my lower lip in a gesture so intimate it made me shiver. "So much for just talking," he said with a small laugh. I laughed too, feeling lighter than I had in months. To be fair, we did talk. The talking was important. "It was," he agreed, squeezing my hand. "But I think we've been talking around this for too long, don't you?" I nodded, leaning in to press another quick kiss to his lips simply because I could now. "What happens next?" I asked, the practical part of my brain finally catching up to the moment. He shifted on the couch, putting his arm around me so I could lean against his chest. It felt so natural, as if we'd been sitting this way for years. "I think," he said thoughtfully, "that we keep talking. And we keep doing this." He pressed a kiss to the top of my head. "And we see where it goes. But I know I want to give us a real chance. Not just friendship with occasional kissing, but something real. I want that too," I said, feeling the steady rhythm of his heart against my ear. "I've wanted it for a long time. I just didn't know if it was possible." "I think," he said slowly, "that the best relationships grow from friendship. We already know we enjoy spending time together. We already care about each other. We're just adding a new dimension to something that was already good." I smiled against his chest, appreciating his perspective. "That's a nice way to look at it. Less scary somehow." "Still a little scary," he admitted, and I loved him for his honesty. "Worth it, though." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, adjusting to this new reality. The sun had shifted, the golden rectangles on my floor now elongated and fading. Outside, I could hear the normal sounds of early evening. Cars passing, someone calling a dog, the distant hum of the city continuing as if nothing momentous had happened. But in my apartment, everything had changed. "You know," I said eventually, "when you said you wanted to just talk, I spent an hour cleaning this place and changing my outfit multiple times." He laughed, the sound rumbling pleasantly under my ear. "If it makes you feel any better, I changed my shirt 3 times and practiced what I was going to say in the car for about 20 minutes before I got up the courage to ring your doorbell." I lifted my head to look at him, charmed by this confession. "Really? You seemed so composed." "Trust me, I was terrified," he said, brushing a strand of hair from my face with a gentleness that made my heart swell. "I had this whole speech planned about how much you mean to me and how I didn't want to ruin our friendship, but I was also tired of pretending I didn't want more." "What happened to the speech?" I asked, curious. He smiled sheepishly. "I forgot every word the moment you opened the door. You looked so beautiful, and I was so nervous. All my carefully planned words just vanished." I felt a blush warm my cheeks at the compliment. "Well, I think you did pretty well without it. I just spoke from the heart," he said simply. It seemed like the only way to do this right. I reached up to touch his face, still somewhat amazed that I could do so freely now. "I'm glad you did. I'm glad you came over to just talk." "Me too," he said, turning his head to kiss my palm. "Though I have to say, the talking was important, but this," he leaned down to kiss me again, lingering and sweet. "This is pretty amazing too." As the kiss deepened, I thought about how words can mean so many things beyond their dictionary definitions. How just talking can be code for so much more. How the right conversation can change everything. And how sometimes, the most important things we have to say aren't spoken with words at all, but with actions, with presence, with the courage to be vulnerable with someone who matters. When he came over that evening, he said he wanted to just talk. But as the night progressed, with conversations that wandered from our feelings to our fears to our hopes for the future, interspersed with kisses that grew increasingly confident, I realized that talking was never really the point. Connection was. Understanding was. Honesty was. And as the evening turned to night, with takeout dinner eaten side by side on my couch and more stories shared between increasingly comfortable silences, I understood that what had begun with just talking had opened the door to something much deeper, much more meaningful than either of us had dared to hope for. He came to talk, yes, but what we both discovered was that sometimes, The most important conversations begin with words but continue with the heart. And sometimes, the message we most need to receive isn't heard with our ears at all, but felt with every part of our being, starting with a kiss that says everything words cannot. Total _char_count, 17,512.